Ganz herzlich willkommen.
Thank you. I was born in The Hague until I was 5. And then the whole family moved. So The Hague is at the beach, at the sea. And then we moved with the whole family to Eindhoven. And after some months, 2 brothers and I got a terrible disease, tuberculosis. It kept me in bed for 1 year and 1 month. My other brothers, they were even longer in bed. So the result was I came to first school later than other children, 1 year later. So probably there was some effect on my psycho, but I don't know. Can't measure that. I was on a boys' school in the early 60s, and we were singing songs of the Beatles that we didn't understand anything about, but it was fun. It was just fun. Later, on secondary school, in the late 60s and early 70s, did make a choice to become a hippie. Everything was very strict. For instance, the girls were not allowed to wear dresses. They had jeans. They had to appear in school with dresses. And before every day, before the first lesson, we had to pray. Because it was a Roman Catholic school, high school. So, but slowly, and I think also because of the influence of the music that we heard, things started to change. We started to change. Society started to change, especially in France, where there were, in '68, the student revolts, and young people wanted to stop being obedient and live their own life. And they didn't want to be like their parents. So they changed. And it went slowly. It wasn't really a choice. You were just part of a movement. We wanted to live our own lives, and we were sick of the strict rules that there were everywhere. So also in the 60s, and especially in the 60s, the fathers started to make money. Because before, after the war until the 60s, the wages didn't rise. People were basically poor. And so you had to do what everybody said. And at a certain point when you could afford it, so when you had more money, you could do some other things that were interesting. You would listen to music, you bought LPs, and there were many song texts that said, born to be wild, or it's my life and I do what I want. And things like that made an impact. So, partly because of the music, and yes, the clothing and long hair were only a reflection, were only the result of something else. We became politically aware. We were, raised in being afraid of the Second or the Third World War. Everybody was afraid of Russia. Of course, many people in, especially the eastern parts of Europe, were not free. So they were under the influence of Russia, but we had enough of it, thinking in terms of war and obedience. So we thought, no, there must be another way to live, be happy. That was it. So clothing is only part of it, and long hair is only, although we were very proud of our long hair. But when it came to the final examination of the secondary school, high school, I was one of two people who didn't want to cut their hair. There was even a song, Almost Cut My Hair. It's funny. Anyway, next question. I don't know. It's a political thing, it's a fashion thing, it's a musical thing, it's a... You didn't really choose to be a hippie, you just liked what other people did, free spirits did. There was a professor in America who said, his name was Timothy Leary, and he said he had a motto, turn on, tune in, drop out. Many people took that literally and they stopped with everything they did, like their work and their school. But, you know, music like, I don't know, you've probably heard of Woodstock. There was a free concert. I was in the early 1970s, I was with my brother, we hitchhiked to Denmark. And in Copenhagen there was a kind of community within the city. It was called Christiania. It was an old kaserne, but abandoned. And the hippies all went there. They went there. There was free music every evening. Every evening there was a band playing. They had their own bakery. They had their own school. They had their own shops. And there was no rule. Nobody was the boss there. I loved it. Of course, it went bad because the drugs came in and then everything changed. But it was fantastic, Christiania. I think it still exists, but not so free as it was before. But we loved it. Before I went to study, I lived with my parents. But unlike many friends and girlfriends, we were free at home. We had our own room on the second floor of the house, and my mom and my father didn't come there. So we were free to do what we want. We is my brothers and sisters. We were free to do what we want, as long as it were, you know, not be criminal or steal. But we smoked and we smoked delicious herbs, and we drank beer and we talked. There was one wall in our house in which you could do what you want. You could make drawings. So every time, also our friends, they came and they make drawings, cartoons. It was a beautiful wall. And when we had enough of it, we would paint it white again and start all over again. So that was funny. Well, then after that, after high school, I went to study in another city. And there I lived in a student flat. So there were, I think, 14 people randomly put together. So you didn't know other people, you just came into a strange situation. We had rooms, each room was 3 by 3 meters, so 9 square meters. And the place to meet each other was the kitchen. We had 2 showers, kitchen, and each had his own room. And that was funny. We had good big parties there, real good parties. But it was a strange way to live together. Later, I was invited to join a commune. But the people who already lived there, they had to vote. And they didn't want me. I don't know why. But I probably too big mouth, I don't know. But they didn't want me. So I never lived in a commune. But I knew people who did. And my mother's youngest brother, he lived in a commune in France. He was a teacher, and he was self-supporting. He grew his own food, he made his own bread, he didn't eat meat, and he invited everybody to come there and have a good time. You could bring your tent, and there was music, and there were, hashish and marijuana, but not hard drugs. And good wine, self-made wine. So there I lived a while, but it was family, and I didn't want to live with my family. And after the student flat, I lived in a house with other people, big house near the river. Then there was a different room. There was 40 square meters instead of 9. So we painted the floor blue and the walls were red, or the other way about. I don't know. It was fun. I had a good time when I studied. I was lucky because I got a grant, so the government paid for my study. Of course, you have to pay it back after your study, but you could also borrow money with a low interest percentage for students, especially for students. There were all kinds of things for students. You could eat almost for free, but it was disgusting. So there was we called it mensa, which is in Latin is table. It's a room where students could eat for little money. But the food was always steamed, and it was really, I went there twice, and it was 2 times disgusting, really. So we had a kitchen on the student flat, and so we cooked together. It's cheaper for everybody. Also, you can't cook alone, because you have to wait, and another one have to wait for you, and another one to wait for another one. So we joined, and that was cheaper, of course. And the person who cooked didn't have to do the dishes, so that was okay. And also we had several jobs. So sometimes I worked, for instance, if I wanted to go on holiday, I worked in a milk factory. And I gave lessons to children who were bad at English, so I taught them English. Well, tried. I remember one time the boy didn't do his homework, and I gave him the money back. I said, give the money to your mother and tell her, Mama, I don't do my homework, so you don't have to pay the teacher. So things like that. But there were all kinds of works that you could do and get some money. So we didn't have much, but we didn't need much. So, okay. For instance, what you hardly see now in my country, in the Netherlands, nobody's hitchhiking anymore. When I was even on high school, we hitchhiked to Denmark and Sweden, and later even more easy. I hitchhiked with the girlfriend. That was easier. So I hitchhiked to Milano, to Roma, especially to Italy. But also I had friends, Italian friends, who worked in Munich in Germany. So you just put up your thumb and hoped for the better. So it was an easy way to get anywhere. No problems. And if you couldn't afford something, then you didn't buy it. It's easy. The first time that I saw a label on a pair of jeans was Levi's. I remember I was school, and my teacher, economy, he asked some girl or boy, I don't remember, who had this little tag on the jeans saying Levi's, reclame. And he said, does the manufacturer, does he pay for that? And the girl said no, and he said, you should ask money for the free reclame. But you know, we wore what we had, and if there was a hole in your pants, or then you ask your mother to put a patch on it. So she, usually, you had blue jeans, full with patches, with flowers or with whatever. Nobody cared. Nobody cared. There were no rules. But later, you know, the big business started, and everybody wanted to buy the brands. But in the beginning, no. Later much later, I saw people for the first time with torn jeans. And I thought, hey, the hippies are coming back. But they bought them like that. So we were patient. We waited till the jeans were so thin that the tore came by itself. I remember I went to Amsterdam very often to buy fur coats. And the mother of one of my girlfriends, she made 2 coats out of 1 coat. So I sold them. People liked fur coats, rabbit or cat. So it was also, you know, a bit money. I remember the first, I was the only one at the high school with what we called Afghanistan coat. They were made of, they even smelled of goats. The shit was still in the wool. But they had beautiful embroidery. So that was really nice. But to come back to your question, no, we didn't have rules. We didn't have rules. Fashion, no. We didn't believe in fashion. But music, yeah, music was important. Concerts were important. I remember, like, you know, when you were hitchhiking, you very often met the same people. They were also hitchhiking. So one came from A to B, and you came from A to C, and then you met the people who came from B to C. So wherever you went, you saw the same people. And when you saw the people that you've seen before, you did like this. Peace, man, that's peace. That was very common. So you always said peace. Peace, brother. Peace, sister. I don't know why. It stopped after a while. Basis of the whole hippie movement is not to have rules. So it's not to do things. It's just enjoy yourself, but no rules. Because the rules destroy the whole idea, the whole philosophy. The rule was no rules. So yes, you could make this sign, peace, this peace there. But as soon as you start making rules, then the idea goes away. So no, at least my surrounding, no. I met people in the communities, in the communes, and they had rules. But not for me. Yeah. My father, he was always up early at 7 o'clock, and sometimes he came down in the living, there was somebody on the couch that he didn't know. So, yes, that was possible. Also, I remember I went hitchhiking to... No, we had a car. We had a car, and a friend of mine and me. We bought a car for 50 gulden at the time. It's about 25 euros, even a bit less. And we went to Italy, and we went through Germany and Austria. And in Austria, there was a guy hitchhiking. And so we said, okay, come in. And he was an Italian. And I had an appointment with a girlfriend in Milano. And somewhere in northern Italy, I called her that we were on our way. And she said, you can't come today because I'm not at home. So come tomorrow. So I said to my friend, so we can't go there because she's not there. And then the Italian said, if you bring me home, you can sleep with me in my house. So after a while, he was sitting in the back seat and I saw he took a knife out of his boot. And I thought, uh-oh. And he said, don't worry. I went to Germany on vacation and my mother said, Germany is a dangerous place, take a knife with you. But you're a good guy, so I don't need it. Okay. Then we came in Vicenza, it's between Milano and Venezia. And he invited us for dinner. So we went to a restaurant and he said, you don't have to pay. And in this restaurant, he met several friends. And he said, these guys are from Holland and I invited them. And then we talked and we drank and we ate. And then he asked the friends, oh, by the way, I don't have money. So can you please pay for them? So they paid for everybody. And then we went to his home and he said, I only have one bed. Is that okay? But it was a bed, maybe 2 meter by 2 meter. So room enough. And then in the middle of the night, so I slept with my friend in the same bed. And in the middle of the night, I felt something. And I thought, hey, Frank, my friend, he's on the left side. So somebody is on the right side now. I'm in the middle. So I touched, oh, it was a girl. But anyway, we fell asleep. Next morning, she introduced herself. She was a girl from Switzerland. And she passed by. She had somebody gave her the address. And she wanted a place to sleep. So, okay. They said, okay, there's one bed. It's big enough for 3. So if you want, you can sleep there. So she slept there. No problem. But that was, mentality. Oh, first they beat you up and then they ask questions. So, especially in Amsterdam, there was a big movement of young people who protested, especially at the university, who protested against everything, but mainly against empty houses. There were a lot of houses were empty. It was speculation of the people who owned them. And there was a lack of room for young people. So they just took the house and they lived in the house. We call it krakers. I think the English word is squatters, but I'm not sure. Anyway, so they were beaten out by the police and then there were riots at the university and we had at home one wall full of pictures of police beating up young people. And tear gas and water, everything. Well, we still see it. But it started, even when the Stones came to, was it the Hague? I think it was the Hague. The Rolling Stones came. And the audience, the young people, they wanted to go to the podium. And they were beaten from the podium. And so there was big fight. And even 10 years later, or maybe even longer, Mick Jagger, he said that was one of the finest concerts he had in the lake. He still remembered the fighting of the police and the people, It was But there is a movie about the Stones. It's called Gimme Shelter. It was in the cinema. And I think it was a free concert too. So 10,000 people or more, they came to the free concert. And the Stones were stupid enough to ask security from the Hells Angels. So the Hells Angels are these people on, I don't know if you know them, on motorbikes and scum. And there was one guy who wanted to kill Mick Jagger, and he was killed by the Hells Angels. So that was a strange concert, you know. But yeah, I think it was in America, but I'm not sure. But it was all recorded, so somebody had a camera and recorded it. So you see the person want to go to Mick Jagger, stabbed or shot, I don't know, but heavy. So after I finished my study, I worked for several companies who needed translation. And that was good, because one was a company that they made inventions on agricultural level. So they asked me to write an article about this invention, and it was in a magazine called Holland Agriculture. This magazine was distributed to all countries in the world. And there was a Japanese company, I forgot their name. Anyway, they were interested. And they contacted the magazine and they thought that I was an expert. But I didn't know anything about the invention. I only wrote the text and the translation. But the people of the company that invented this machine, they asked me, do you want to go to America? Because we don't have time for that. And we will teach you how it works. And so, okay. I said, okay. It's part of the career, between brackets, that I made. I was always available for new things, for interesting things. I think there's an Italian writer who wrote a whole book about it. Not about me, but about being available. Anyway, so I said yes. And I went to Texas and I worked with pigs. Most Texans work with cows, but I worked with pigs. And it gave me the idea, hey, people here are interested in European stuff. And I have always been interested in, well, it was a kind of hobby to repair things. So I made a chair, even when I worked in Italy. I worked in a kitchen near Rome. It was a community of Rome, but it was the place called Ostia, near the sea. And they asked me, can you fix something? I said, yeah, sure. So they asked me to fix the chairs in the cantina. And I liked it. I always liked doing things with my hands. So when the opportunity came to start an antique shop, I said, yeah, why not? It was my brother-in-law who came with the idea to buy a house in Antwerp and start a shop. It was only an idea. So we went looking for houses and we found one and it needed to be repaired, but okay. And we were not sure. But then we were near the central station of Antwerp in Belgium and we saw a big advertisement of Nike and it said, just do it. So it said, this is the sign, let's do it. And we did it. So nobody was my boss, I was my own boss. I decided when to get up, when to go to sleep, when to go to the cafe. My daily routine was get up at 10 o'clock, no, open the shop at 12, then work till 6, then go to the cafe, drink a beer, had my dinner, then I would work till 2 o'clock in the night in my workshop. My cafe became, because it was in the center, became a meeting point for many people. So, especially in the weekends, everybody came to my shop and they brought beer and they brought sweets and sandwiches and whatever. So we always had a good time, you know. Sometimes I said, "Oh, guys, please go away, because my customers don't have the courage to come into my shop because you all are here." So it was horrible. Later in 2007, I rented another house with 4 rooms, so I had 6 rooms, and I made a lot of money in that time. Really a lot of money. I bought things from colleagues, got special price. I went to a lot of flea markets, especially in Brussels. There's a big square where you can. It's usually this filled with Moroccans. So, but they don't care what they have. They just want to sell it. So I bought a lot in Brussels. I bought a lot on other flea markets. There are people, after a while, they come with their own stuff. Can you sell it for me? So I did that too. So I took about 20% or so from what they, and give the rest to them. A lot, more and more. The longer you have a shop, the more people come to offer their things that they want to get rid of. So, yeah, but the most interesting thing was a house that I was allowed to empty. And I found, I think it was about 300 golden coins. And, but they were not mine, so I had to give them. But American gold, they were €500 per piece. That was my biggest find. But, so my things I got from everywhere and nowhere. So, and you learn to know people. And then sometimes you have a deal. Somebody came to my shop and he had a beautiful couch. And he was looking for, I don't know what, chairs or something. And so we just swapped. He went away with my chairs and I had his beautiful couch. It was not difficult to get stuff. It was more difficult to sell them, of course. And there were a lot of things that I had to repair. So I bought, cheaply bought, wardrobes and other closets, and then I stripped the paint off, or I repaired them, and then I sold them, of course, with a profit. But I could start again, no problem. It was in 2008, and just after New Year, I heard that my girlfriend said, "I no longer want to be with you." So, okay. That was blow number 1. The blow number 2 was that they diagnosed me with cancer. That was in September. And blow number 3 was that there was an international financial crisis in 2008. So people didn't come to my bread and breakfasts anymore. Anyway, so I felt not well, so I went to the doctor. I had some tests, and they said, "You have to go to the hospital because there's some obstruction in your guts." Okay, my intestines. And then they found that it was cancer, but they didn't tell me immediately. They didn't know. So they didn't see much. But then they operated me, and they saw it was terrible. So they opened me and closed me again, because they said, "This guy is going to die." And I woke up from after the operation, and there was a man sitting next to my bed on a chair. And he said, "Cancer is a very serious disease." And I thought, what the fuck is he talking about? Who has cancer? But it was me. So it came as a big surprise. Okay, so I had, I don't know, I don't remember how long I was in hospital. I remember it was a serious operation because somebody came to visit me. I was on intensive care. And somebody came to visit me, and I said, "Hey, I asked you not to come the first day after And he said, it is not the first day, it's the third day. So I missed 2 days. I was in, I don't know where I was, somewhere. Anyway, so that after a couple of days, they brought me to a normal room. And, it was, I didn't really understand what was going on. But, slowly it appeared, hey, Hans, you have cancer, and it doesn't look well. So I had to, when I could walk again, I had to go to the oncologist. And he said, well, we can't help you. You are going to die. I said, okay, but how long will it take? And he said, well, we think about 3 months. And I said, wow, that's strange. And so people afterwards said he didn't realize what was going on, but that wasn't true. I realized what the guy said, but I couldn't believe it. So there was a little voice in my head that said, no way. But, then he said, there's one option, and it's a new medication. And it's so new that it is not even paid back by the insurance, but the manufacturer is an American company. They want to pay it for you just to test it. And I said, oh. And he said, here you have 2 A4 papers, and there were all kinds of problems that you could have if you took that medication. And he said, take your time, go to the cantina in the hospital. And there was a girlfriend was with me. So we did that together. And we were reading all these things. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I prefer to die. So we went back to the oncologist and I said, I'm not going to do that. And he said, well, you don't really have a choice. Either you do it or you die. That's the choice. I said, but all these diseases that you can get, all these side effects, he said, you will not get all of them, but they don't want to take any risk and they don't want to have any responsibility if you die. So my advice, sign it because it's your last chance. So I said, okay, I'll sign it. So they gave me 6 times 3 days, 18 days of chemo combined with this product. So I don't know how you call that, infuse, Baxters, we called it in Antwerp. One with water, one with chemo, and there's a cocktail, chemo, it's for everybody different. And one this special product. So I was sitting, it started at 7 o'clock in the morning until 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then I could go home and come back the next. It was always on a Monday, but they gave me the chemo in a bag with a pump, so I was full of tubes and wires and tape, and so that everything stayed at its place. And then hoppa, new shot. I can tell you it's terrible. It is really terrible. You are so fucking tired. And in the hospital, they gave me, for a painkiller, they gave me morphine. And they put a needle in your back. And you have a button. And if you are in pain, you push the button. And then after seconds, the pain is gone. But of course, I didn't have this morphine at home. So I had to take paracetamol and ibuprofen and whatever, because I had a lot of pain, But the good thing was, I knew a woman, she was the daughter of a baroness. And anyway, the daughter said she also had a big house in Italy, and she said, you can have my house in Antwerp because it's bigger than yours, and so you can receive all your friends, and okay. So I had a beautiful house, and my friends came. They cooked for me every day. If I had to go to the doctor or to the hospital, always somebody with me. So it was the worst time of my life and the best time. Doggy. There was a guy who owned a cafe, and he saw me sitting in another cafe, and he said, and he came, he put his bicycle against a lantern pole, and he came and he said, I heard about your disease, and I'm sorry for you, and I come to visit you, and I take the biggest bottle of Duvel, which is very good Belgian beer. And I said, okay. And later he died. He died. People beat him up, and he went to the hospital, and he stayed there for 3 days or so, and then he said, I'm going home. And they said, no, you're not going home. He said, I'm going home because I'm not insured. So he went home, had to sign that the hospital was not responsible, and he went home. And that night he died in his own vomit. So he was sick and died. When there was some kind of meeting in a church, beautiful church in Antwerp. And after I went out for this guy, and after I came out, the doctor called, the oncologist, and he said, you know, there's a strange thing. We have seen the results of the chemo and this special product, and we can't find anything anymore. So you have to do this week 3 tests. First, 3 scans. First, a normal scan, MRI or whatever it is. Then a scan with sound. They bombard you. You get a piece of lead, and then they bombard you with all kinds of sounds, tones. You feel them even, the bases. And there was a radioactive test. So you had to drink something, and then you couldn't move. You were not even allowed to read, because then you moved your eyes too much. And you had to be completely silent, and which is difficult for me, and not move for 10 minutes. And then I had to come for the results, and the doctor said, the oncologist, he said, you know, I think we can cure you. I think you're not going to die. Because all the cancer cells have disappeared. And the thing is, I was so convinced that I was going to die that I couldn't be happy. I was sure I was going to die. I even with my brother-in-law had chosen the music for my funeral, which is ridiculous because when you're dead, you don't hear much. But okay, but we did that, you know. And I was thinking of Mozart's Requiem, and I thought, no, that's too beautiful for me. I'm not worth it. So anyway, so everybody were happy, and I was, you know, a bit indifferent. So okay, so I'm not going to die. Okay, okay, start with your life again. You know, I am sure that this friendship and love that I received from my friends and even from unknown people. There were people who, you know, there was, for instance, one nurse, I hardly knew her, and she said, you can call me anytime, 24 hours a day, and I come to help you. So people were so friendly, everybody. So I thought that helped me mentally, because then it gives you the feeling that you're not alone, that you're not doing this alone. The medication also had side effects that I was hallucinating. So I was not really sure what was truth and what was fiction. So even at the same time, I was reading a newspaper, for instance. That was actual, that was the truth. I was reading a newspaper, but on the newspaper was a column of ants. No, spiders. And I said to the nurse, hey, this is a hospital. There's so many spiders here. And she said, there are no spiders here. And I said, look in the ceiling, a whole nest. I thought 1,000. And she said, are you on drugs or something? I said, no. But there was a side effect of my medication. So many things. Later I heard from a guy who has a bookshop in Antwerp. He said, sometimes we had to leave the room because we didn't want to laugh in your face. Because you were saying such stupid things that you saw. For instance, I said, what's this vase? It was a big vase doing in my room. And who wrapped it in fur? Why do you, and pink fur, why? But he said there was no vase and there was no pink fur. And so I said, well, I saw it. Huh? He said, we went out of the room and then started to laugh and then go back into the room again. So, no, I think basically I was just lucky. Well, first of all, I don't believe it was a fight. People told me, you are a hero, you conquered cancer, or you were fighting and you won. But I don't think I was fighting. Maybe my body was, but I wasn't aware of having a fight. No, I was just doing exactly what they told me to do. And I was helped by a lot of people, and that was it. I was just lucky. But it did change me. I was never alone in Antwerp. Well, at night, but usually there were always people around me, and I enjoyed that. So I was, to be modest, I was pretty popular. So people liked me, and they came to me, and they came to see each other in my shop, and so it was always, even in the hospital, somebody brought a bottle of wine, and they made a party in the hospital. So they asked the nurses for glasses. Can you have? Oh, do you only have these glasses? You don't have wine glasses? So the nurse said after an hour, she said, hey, this guy needs rest, go away. And then she asked me later, was that all right? Because I'm a bit ashamed. I said, I'm glad you asked it, so I didn't have to do that. So, yeah, a lot of people. And it changed. I didn't want to see so many people anymore. And I still don't want to see so many people anymore. No, it changed. That's really a big change. I like to be on my own. I like to be alone. Sometimes I go to a cafe. Sometimes I go back to Antwerp where I still have friends. And we have a good time, but it's not like it was. No, I don't want that anymore. So that changed, really changed me. I worked in America. I worked in Denmark. I worked in Germany. And most of all, most importantly, I worked in Italy. And that's my second Heimat, fatherland. I have always been interested in how other people look at the world. So I wanted to see the world through the eyes of other people. And in Holland, they think they're the best country of the world. They are not the best country of the world. So other people have other ways of looking at life, at each other, just as interesting, just as good. I learned to be tolerant. So you meet people from other countries with another skin color, or with another religion, or with other sexual preferences. All of these things. It's okay with me because it learns me something. I learn something. It teaches me something. But so yes, I think it enriches. It's like reading, when you read, especially if you read books from writers from another country in another language, but translated or not, you look at the world in a different way. So it makes you wiser and more modest. When I look back, I'm an old man now. God forbid it, but okay, I'm an old man. I have to accept that. And you know, the interesting thing is, a couple of months before they diagnosed cancer, a good friend asked me, we were sitting, two men and a girl, we were sitting on a terrace, drinking a beer, and he said, what if somebody said to you, you have 3 more months to live? What would you do? I said, well, I don't know what I would do, but I would think it's a bit early. I was 55 or so at that time. And I said, but when I look back on my life, the most important thing for me, I laughed a lot. I laughed at everything. There was so much humor in my life. I had such good times, you know, and I laughed my head off, really. And then a couple of months later, they diagnosed cancer and said, you have 3 months to live. And then I thought, fuck, I have heard this before. I was 55 when they diagnosed me with cancer, and the doctor said, you are lucky that you're still young. I said, can you repeat that very slowly, in slow motion? Because I felt old when I was 55. But now I'm almost 20 years later. I still have a lot of things that I can laugh about. And I think, especially when we travel, still see some beautiful things that you can't imagine that people made that. There's a war going on everywhere in Ukraine. There's a war going on in Iran. There's wars going on in Sudan, in South America. And I think it's just the other part, the other side of humankind. They destroy. They destroy. You should look at the world and see what people are capable of, how creative they are, what beautiful things they make. That's important. War is just stupidity and barbarism. Okay, but okay. Basta.